It was a time some 1,500 years ago when peoples now called the Sinagua and Cohonina first moved into the northern Arizona area. A nearby volcano would soon rumble to life. It was a pioneering time for the native peoples in these lands just north of present-day Flagstaff, before the walls of Wapatki were built. The most extensive archaeological excavation in the Flagstaff area of northern Arizona has found new clues about the past lives of early inhabitants of the region near the San Francisco Peaks. This major excavation and research was undertaken to comply with federal and state environmental laws as they pertain to a road widening project on Highway 89 just north of Flagstaff. The Arizona Department of Transportation contracted with Desert Archaeology to conduct the work. The archaeology in the Highway 89 project involved an intensive gathering of data from 37 prehistoric archaeological sites along the highway corridor, stretching close to 20 miles. The nearby San Francisco Peaks are considered sacred by many different Native American tribes in the region, including the Navajo, Zuni, and Hopi. During the course of the excavation work, members of the Hopi Tribe were consulted for their input into the lives of their probable ancestors. Along with the scientific gathering of data using the most recent tools available, archaeologists are painting a picture of what life was like here from the period 500 to 1200 AD.
This project essentially has excavated the largest number of features, houses, pits, things like that have ever been excavated at once in Flagstaff. We've recovered over 100,000 artifacts. This will enable us to really put together a much more complete picture of the sequence of occupation here.
The earliest evidence of occupation of the Flagstaff region by pottery-producing people was found during the recent excavations. Project archaeologists believe that these people first settled here somewhere around 450 AD. It was around the time that several different groups were known in the Southwest.
For many years, archaeologists have struggled trying to determine the similarities and differences of the people who lived in the Flagstaff area from those of the surrounding territory. Around Flagstaff, we have the Kayenta and Winslow prehistoric Pueblo people to the north and northeast, the Cohonina to the west-northwest, the Hohokam to the south, and the Mogollon culture to the east-southeast. The Sinagua, related to the generalized Mogollon culture, appear to have moved in from the east-southeast, and perhaps a little bit later, the Cohonina, perhaps more allied to the Kayenta people, moved in from the north and the northwest.
In the 1930s, Dr. Harold Colton of the Museum of Northern Arizona began the work of unlocking the mystery of early inhabitants here by attempting to recognize distinguishing characteristics of the peoples living in the area.
In the 1930s, Dr. Colton started developing a classification system for potsherds found all over the northern part of the Southwest, especially northern Arizona. And he was interested in answering two questions. How old is each kind of pottery, and who made it? And by that he meant which culture group. And Colton felt that he could differentiate these groups and trace their histories through time by using a standard, consistent, and very detailed classification system for the pottery they left behind.
Dr. Colton's ceramic classification system was a basis for determining that the Sinagua and Cohonina were different cultures. The two groups were deemed separate based on the differences in the color of their pottery, materials used as temper to prevent shrinkage in the pots, and decoration.
In terms of painted decoration, the Cohonina and Sinagua pottery traditions are very, very different. Cohonina people occasionally put black designs on their pots. This is a bowl rim with a band of decoration that consists of thin lines, triangles, dots. We see that over and over. Each one's different, but a fairly similar design repertoire. And then the Sinagua almost never painted their pottery at all, always in a white on red, and a very small proportion of pots in any given site will be painted.
Although Colton's classification system did point out major differences in pottery, the question remains, does this difference mean that the people were of different cultures? In the Highway 89 project, archaeologists have a chance to examine this question further, since the project area crosses the theoretical Sinagua and Cohonina border.
The Highway 89 project is very exciting because very little work has been done in a systematic way in this area. What makes this systematic is it's a line from Flagstaff headed straight up north. So we get this whole Sinagua-Cohonina continuum, and we can ask the question, if there's a boundary there, what does it look like if there's a boundary? Or are there potentially many boundaries, many perhaps overlapping territories of people that we're calling Sinagua and Cohonina because of differences in pottery? Now we can look at architecture, at the way they made a living. We can look at other lines of evidence and say what kind of a boundary, if any, is located in this area.
One of the most interesting aspects of this linear transect is the fact that it goes through what had previously been defined as the boundary between two different cultural groups, the Sinagua to the south and the Cohonina to the north. And right now, we're still in a very preliminary phase of analysis, and the answer to whether these people are distinct or not, or whether they are actually one and the same, is still very much out. It's interesting. There's some data sets that right now, such as the flakestone and the groundstone, they're suggesting that these people are functioning in pretty different ways. They're making different tools, and they're using them differently. The pollen data are suggesting that these people are eating different things. However, there's other lines of data, such as the architecture, that they're really building very similar types of structures. Their social space, they're using space very much the same way, and that, you know, maybe they're not different at all. So this is one avenue that we will need to keep investigating, but it's a very important question.
Modern advances in conducting archaeological excavations make it possible to work quickly and recover much more data. The recent project is allowing archaeologists to build upon the information already known about the Sinagua and Cohonina people.
Both groups were agriculturalists, although the Cohonina hunted more so than the Sinagua did in terms of their major part of their economy. They began as scattered pit house villages, farming small pockets of soil, primarily in the Ponderosa zone, where there was more moisture. For most of the history of the Sinagua, we would have seen people living in separate family groups in small pit house villages of perhaps 3 to 5 houses. These would be spaced perhaps, half a mile to a mile apart, and daily activity would consist primarily of either hunting in the fall season or during most of the spring and summer growing season of growing crops in fields between the different washes or in the broad alluvial parkland areas. One of the important contributions the project has made is that prior to this time, most excavations only sampled portions of sites. And the Highway 89 project realized that we needed to see large sections of complete villages in order to understand internal organization, which in turn would allow us to better understand the differences and similarities between the Cohonina and the Sinagua. This gives us a whole new set of information that we didn't have before.
The room that I'm standing in here probably measured about 15 feet by 15 feet, and it's connected on either end by 2 other rooms that are about the same size. Now I'm standing in a swath that's only about 6 feet wide, and this is because we tested this area first to see where the floor was, what was on the floor, what the fill was like. Now we're going to draw a profile of the wall here, and then we will move out to excavate the entire room. What we usually find on the floors of these rooms are things like fire pits, pits for storage of food and other goods, and sometimes whole vessels, pots, things like that. But generally, most of the activity, the day-to-day activities, occurred outside of the rooms. Rooms were really probably only used during the winter when it was cold and you needed some warmth, or for sleeping at night. On the floor of this room, we found a large hearth or fire pit. And you can see that the hearth is circular and it was plastered. Now we cut the hearth in half because we wanted to find out what was underneath it. And because when we did this, we actually found there were 3 little separate hearths. The fact that there are 3 separate hearths suggests that the room had been remodeled and reoccupied over a number of years. For example, you might have built one hearth 1 year, left for a season, gone away for the winter maybe, come back, put in another hearth, gone away for a few more years, and come back and put in another hearth. And this gives clues to archaeologists about how long structures were occupied and how they were used. The fact that there's a hearth in this room suggests that it was used for living or for habitation. We have other rooms that we find without hearths or without other sorts of storage pits and things like that we assume may have been used for maybe religious purposes or for other sorts of reasons.
In addition to trying to answer questions about village life and borders between various groups in the area, the project is also closely examining the movements of people in the region over time. After several hundred years of frontier existence, the people were faced with the violent awakening of Sunset Crater, similar in type to the volcano Paracutin, which erupted in Mexico in the 1940s. Erupting for the first time in 1064, Sunset Crater remained active for a period of about 200 years. What this meant for those living nearby is another focus of the Highway 89 project.
Many clans were in the Sunset Crater area in days past, long time ago. And they lived there and they survived there until one time the earth began to move. And when the earth began to move, they said among themselves that it is something that we have to acknowledge as a message from the earth. The sea serpent, the serpent that lives underground in the water, is telling us that it is time to move on.
The eruption of Sunset Crater is probably one of the most significant things that ever occurred in the lives of the people who lived in the project area. We know from data collected before the project by Dr. Colton and others that the volcano erupted probably in the last quarter of the 11th century. And that was time when the project area was most intensely inhabited. And so the people who lived there would have felt this volcano go off. They would have first felt earthquakes and earth tremors. We know from modern volcanoes that sometimes as many as 300 earth tremors a day are felt. And then there would have been a crack in the ground, and from this crack would have risen this steam and this smoke, and this ash would have started spewing out. And the ash would have started to form this cinder cone, and the cinder cone would have started to grow, and then lava would have erupted from the bottom of the cinder cone. And then as the ash clouds, which had been estimated as high as 16 kilometers high, these ash clouds, they would start making their own weather system. And so you'd have thunder and lightning coming down into this system. And the people who lived around there must have been the most phenomenal sight they've ever seen.
It is estimated that the plume of the eruption could have been seen as far away as northern Mexico and Grand Junction, Colorado. To help answer questions about the local effects on the landscape, the project team brought in volcanologist Dr. Michael Ort to help in the research.
During the eruption at Sunset Crater, this would not have been a good place to be in close to the volcano, largely because of the raining of all these cinders down upon you. When it was putting out lava flows, the lava flows came along at very slow rates, and a person could walk away from them without any danger. So the danger to human life was very small. The danger to human habitation and agriculture, on the other hand, and the effects was quite large. I've been working on the thickness of the cinders from Sunset Crater around the Sunset Crater area, especially to the north. The reason is because with the cinders, they can be devastating on agriculture, creating barren areas like you can see behind, or with a thinner layer, perhaps 10 centimeters, they can actually be beneficial, serving as a mulch to conserve water, with the plant being able to make it up through it, but the water being conserved and the agriculture actually being improved in the area. So one of the things we've been doing is mapping out the thicknesses of cinders in this region and trying to figure out where it was farmable and where it wasn't.
Probably the most prominent theory in Flagstaff area archaeology, and this was developed by Dr. Harold Colton in the 30s, is that the ash from Sunset Crater, where it was thin and in layers that were less than 5 inches or so, acted as a mulch to retain moisture. And this allowed previously unfertile or barren areas to now be farmed. And therefore, it attracted people to move into this area. So in a sense, Colton suggested that the eruption of Sunset Crater, rather than frightening people away, acted as a magnet. And Colton called this the black sand effect, or a prehistoric land rush, as people moved into a previously barren area to use the now fertile soils. Once the isopack map is completed and we know the thickness of the ash, we'll essentially be able to come up with a model that says that these areas could no longer be inhabited, whereas these areas would now be ideal for habitation. So we will actually be able to look at population movement. Areas that were under the ash that could no longer be farmed, where people had to leave, and areas that had thin layers of ash, which would have been now conducive for agriculture, where they could go to.
The ruins of Wapatki stand just north of the project area and Sunset Crater. Settled sometime in the 1100s, it has been theorized as a benefactor of the black sand effect proposed by Dr. Colton. But could it have been something else that attracted the early peoples to that area? As part of the project, the team has conducted a paleoclimatic reconstruction using data from tree rings in the area. Each year that a tree grows, it is affected by the temperature and the amount of water that falls. Dendroclimatologists from the University of Arizona have taken core samples from the trees and are reconstructing the moisture and temperature patterns stretching as far back as 500 AD that will help answer the Wapatki settlement question.
Wapatki is located in an extremely barren, waterless area. And in some ways, it's unfathomable why people would choose that area to live. Because Wapatki really didn't take off until after 1100, we can provide this sequence up until Wapatki. And the Hopi, in fact, believe that their people migrated through our project area and then over to Wapatki, and then from Wapatki eventually to the Hopi Mesas. One of the ways that we will be able to help investigate Wapatki is the paleoclimatic reconstruction. And it does appear that Wapatki was settled during a particularly wet period. So in some ways, this may have been a sucker effect, that you have 30 years of cold, wet rain. People are going to move down into Wapatki, take advantage of that. So right now, I think it's still out, whether Wapatki was settled initially because of the mulch of the cinders from Sunset Crater, or whether it was also due to paleoclimatic change, or maybe a combination of the two.
Integral to the archaeology taking place on the Highway 89 project was the participation of members of the Hopi Tribe. The Hopis have long stated that their ancestors migrated through these areas before finally settling on the Hopi mesas of northern Arizona. They visit the sites and look for signs of their people and try to shed light on how they lived.
You know what it looks to be like? The part of it is missing on this side. It could be a pipe. Could be a pipe. See? Right here.
Yeah, the other part was round,
yeah.
too.
So it could be a pipe. It's amazing that our people were here one time. And today, a lot of things that we were told by our elders, and it is true. These people are opening our history. It's like a book. You're learning from our history. And it helps us to continue to tell our youngsters that our people went through here before before anybody was here in this continent.
Many of the Hopi clans consider this area as a good point in their clan migration traditions. For my clan, the Bear Clan, Flagstaff itself, the Nuvatikiaovi area is considered one of our pioneering areas, a place kind of in some ways a homeland which was settled by the clan. And for other clans, it's also a stopping area with ruins here and there that they recognize. But for all Hopi, this area is considered a simple place for settlement along the entire migration route, which was to lead up to the present Hopi mesas, which are considered today and in the past our promised land, a land where we were supposed to all migrate to and to converge together to create a Hopi society as we see it today.
Corn. For over 1,000 years, it has sustained the native peoples who lived here. The Hopi Tribe still practices the dry farming techniques that were mastered many generations ago. As it is used in ceremonies today, corn continues to hold special significance to the Hopi people. A possible connection between the Hopis and the prehistoric agricultural peoples that lived here was made when archaeologists discovered near the project area a piece of lava imprinted with corn kernels. This piece of rock is dramatic evidence of people living close to an active lava flow during the Sunset Crater eruption.
One of the more exciting finds we've made is a piece of Sunset Crater lava that has impressions of corn plants in it. And there are at least 7 corn plants impressed into this lava, as well as a little bit of husk, but most of it is already husk corn. And this is very exciting because it really does bring close the eruption of the volcano and the fact that people were not only living here, but possibly making offerings to the volcano to either stop the lava or appease whatever forces were responsible.
The lava moved in along individual kernels on the corn, leaving beautiful impressions. This requires a highly fluid lava, much more fluid than the lava that we see at the surface here. We tried to recreate this in Hawaii and found that we couldn't do it just by putting it in front of the lava. The only way we've been able to come up with to produce it is by taking very fluid lava and flicking it onto a pile of corn, and that was able to produce this sort of very, very detailed impressions of corn.
We found the corn rock, as we call it, at a site removed from the nearest lava flow about 4 kilometers. So it had to have been picked up by somebody prehistorically and brought to the site because we found it embedded in the wall of a prehistoric masonry house. Because the corn rocks themselves were removed from the Sunset Crater lava flows, taken 4 kilometers away to another site, we think that the rocks had special significance. And I suggest that this is probably some sort of ritual effect related to the volcano. Perhaps by having these corn rocks, the people felt that they were protected from the volcano, or perhaps it was related to the power of the volcano. We know from ethnographic accounts, from accounts of people living by volcanoes, that ritual and volcanism go hand in hand. For example, there was an eruption in 1943, Paricutin in Mexico, where the people tried to stop the flowing lava from covering their town by placing rows of crosses in front of the lava. It didn't work, but it's possible that the corn was placed in front of the flowing lava in a similar way. We may never know.
The corn-impressed rock may reflect a religious activity or a religious offering that Hopi do. You know, we many times perform it in terms of ground corn, but in other instances we do present whole ears of corn for certain events or certain instances where ritual is carried out. And I think at this significant event, the Sunset Crater eruption, that such an occurrence may have prompted them to do such an offering themselves.
The ambitious Highway 89 archaeology project has succeeded in shedding new light on the prehistory of northern Arizona New data will help to significantly refine some old questions about the Sinagua and Cohonina, with answers coming as more research is conducted in the area in the years to come. We know that within about 100 years from the time of the initial eruption, the people living here gradually coalesced into larger settlements, like those found at Wapatki, which they would eventually leave to continue their migration. But it was the individual families that first succeeded in gaining a toehold here. They built their homes, grew their crops, and made a stand amidst their ominous neighbor, Sunset Crater.
My people were here before, nobody else. And if you look back and today, we were full of different people. But those days, they were here alone. And they probably have a little hard time, but they survive in their own hard way.